Okay, guys, time for another biography. Who's on the docket today? That would be Marlo Hampton. Now, if you watch my channel, you know I do a series that's called Life After Housewives, which basically is a Where Are They Now ex-Housewives series. And after every video, I always say, who do you guys want to see next? Time and time again, the name Marlo Hampton kept coming up. And I almost overlooked it because I thought Marlo currently has a job on the Real Housewives of Atlanta. She's no ex anything. But I soon realized I know little to practically nothing about Marlo. So I started looking into her life just a little. And that's when I realized her life really does remind me of the saying, before something great happens, everything falls apart. And that means if you're born into a bad situation or you're going through a tough time, if you get the meaning and the lesson of what you're going through, you will eventually come out for the best. So I had to pick Marlo. So what kind of ups and downs has she had going on in her life? Well, as I always say, let's start from the beginning. Marlo Hampton was born in Clearwater, Florida on February 7, 1976. She was raised by her mother, whose name was Emma, and at a very early age, Emma married a welder who became Marlo's stepfather. Both her mother and her stepfather were very big gamblers that gambled every Friday. If they were lucky that day at gambling, they would come back and take all the children out to eat, and if they were unlucky, they would come back fighting and drunk and crazy. Marlo would go on to say, as a child, her mother never hugged her. Simply put, her mother lacked affection. She wanted things to be done a certain way, Marlo would go on to say. She was the kind of woman that kept plastic on her couch and made strict rules regarding school and clothes. Eventually, Emma ended up divorcing Marlo's stepfather, and they moved to Memphis long enough for Emma to get her son back. He was staying with his father. Once Marlo's little brother was back with the family, they made a final move back to Florida with everyone. Back in Florida, with her stepfather gone, Marlo just assumed that things were going to get better, but they didn't. In fact, they got worse. Her mother got back on drugs, and this time she became violent and abusive towards Marlo. One of the worst and final beatings happened to Marlo when she was 9 years old. Her mother was cooking a pot of greens, and before she left the room, she told Marlo, "Do not go in my pot of greens." But Marlo didn't listen. She went into the pot of greens anyway. Marlo would go on to say that when her mother returned and seen that she spilled some of the collard greens on the floor, she began to severely beat her. Her exact words were, "This lady beat me so bad, it was crazy. She put me on the ground, put her foot on my neck, beating me with an extension cord for going in a pot of food." After the beating, she told Marlo to go in the back and give her little brother a bath. But instead of bathing her little brother, she told him, "I'm going to leave you, but I'll come back." Later, she would go on to say, "I should have taken him with me. He would have had a better chance, but I didn't. I was 9 years old. I didn't know." When Marlo ran out the house, she went to a couple named Ronald and June Cook. They were a Jamaican family she met at church. Marlo described them as being an all-American family. She said there was a dad, his wife, son, and daughter. Things went bad for Marlo at their house too. The dad used to beat Marlo also. He was a very strict man, and Marlo soon realized she had to get out of there too, so she left. She went to another family, but because this family was not HRS foster parents, they had to contact HRS, and HRS had to come and do a background check on them. But when Marlo complained to the social worker that the dad beat her in the hand and how strict he was, she was removed from that home. This time she ended up in St. Petersburg, Florida, in a group home temporarily until they found another home for her. Eventually, they found another foster home for her, ran by a woman called Mrs. Ferguson. Miss Ferguson had all boys and always wanted a girl. Mrs. Ferguson would allow her to go back to Clearwater on weekends to visit her mother. Now, to many, this would seem like an unusual request. Why would Marlo want to go back to visit her mother when her mother was the reason she ran away in the first place? Believe it or not, it really isn't that unusual. Many children still have a deep love for their parents, even though their parents aren't being the best. And Marlo, well, she was no exception. Every weekend, when Marlo would come back from visiting her mother, she would be crying. And that was because things were still the same. They'd still be drinking. In other words, it was still a confusing, chaotic situation. And Mrs. Ferguson, she couldn't help but to notice that the situation was deeply affecting Marlo. She was always crying and upset when she returned home from her visits. She thought that Marlo should probably stop her visits back to Clearwater to see her mother. She didn't think it was a safe environment for her, but Marlo didn't want to stop her visits. Marlo ended up telling someone her feelings, how she thought Mrs. Ferguson was too strict and didn't like her. Eventually, the things that Marlo said got back to Mrs. Ferguson. And one day when Marlo got out of school, the social workers were waiting for her. She was being removed from another home. They were moving around Marlo so much, she just got to the point where she accepted that she was going to be moved from home to home. Marlo was placed in another temporary group home. Marlo's final foster home was with a family called the Hopkins, who she remains in contact with till this day. But there were problems at the Hopkins home as well. Their biological daughter thought Mrs. Hopkins was giving Marlo too much attention. And one day, Marlo came home from school and Mrs. Hopkins says, "Marlo, we love you, but my younger daughter's having problems in school and acting out because I'm giving you more attention than her." Now, I'm not trying to make excuses for Marlo, but getting moved around from home to home, not getting true affection from your real mother, that would affect anyone. So then the question becomes, can someone overcome all of those obstacles? Eventually, Marlo graduated from St. Petersburg High School in 1994. Marlo would go on to say that her foster grandmother, Ari, made sure that she went to college. She went to the University of Southern Florida. It was during these years that the horrific face-slashing incident took place, the one that we all know about. According to the paperwork, a 23-year-old Marlo was at the club with her good friend. The two women got into an argument over a man. The argument escalated, and Marlo ended up severely slashing her good friend's face. Marlo was arrested and charged with aggravated battery and great bodily harm with a weapon. Later, Marlo would go on to say there was more to that story that the public didn't know. She said she was actually ambushed at her house and badly beaten prior to the incident. She also added that the victim herself would go on to appear in court on Marlo's behalf. But this didn't stop Marlo of actually being convicted of second-degree felony and sentenced to several months in prison. After that, Marlo was arrested 6 other times for things like parole violation and for obtaining property of services in return for worthless checks, drafts, or credit orders under $150, and possession of a firearm. And despite all of that, Marlo still managed to graduate from college, where she earned a BA in social work from the College of Art and Sciences at the University of Southern Florida on December 12, 2003. Now, if you think Marlo's life was unpredictable up to this point, well, don't, because I'm here to tell you things get even more unpredictable. After college, Marlo moved to Atlanta, where she worked at a clothing store in the mall. This is where she had a chance encounter with a mysterious man. She said this man would just sit and stare at her until one day he walked over and gave her a Valentine's Day card. He said, "I love your work ethic. I see you come to work every day. You dress so nice." The mysterious man turned out to be a billionaire, and the two entered into a 5-year-long relationship. Hundreds of outlets reported that it was CNN founder Ted Turner. Yes, people, you know that guy that created that little station that give us news 24 hours a day. Now, Marlo would go on to say that Ted Turner was not her mysterious billionaire boyfriend. Later, she would confess that her billionaire boyfriend was a good friend of Ted Turner's. Now, after hours and hours of extensive research, I could not come up with one name associated with Marlo as to who her billionaire boyfriend was. In fact, the only name that kept coming up was Ted Turner. And not only did his name keep coming up, so did more details. Many outlets reported that Ted Turner was Marlo's mysterious billionaire boyfriend. I mean, after all, people, there are not that many billionaires walking around. And not only did his name continue to resurface, details surfaced that Marlo was the cause of the divorce from his legendary actress wife, Jane Fonda. Now, whether Ted Turner is or isn't the billionaire boyfriend, one thing is certain, that relationship really changed Marlo's life. It's been reported that this billionaire outright purchased Marlo's chic townhome, the one that we always see on television. He also purchased another property outright, which he gave to Marlo, and Marlo gave to her mother. And as a little reminder, that means Marlo doesn't have a mortgage like 99% of the rest of the population. Then he purchased her a store called the Red Carpet Boutique in the Perimeter Mall in Atlanta. This store attracted many celebrities and introduced her to the celebrity lifestyle that we know of her today. Many people from the housewife world even came to that store. People like Nene Leakes and Kandi Burruss. This store even attracted housewife production and producers. In other words, Marlo started penetrating the Atlanta housewives' inner circle before she even entered the set of the housewives. So when producers got wind that Marlo was dating football star Charles Grant, the man that was allegedly having an affair with Nene Leakes, producers couldn't help themselves. They had to reach out to Marlo. There was no doubt that this storyline would make interesting reality television. This storyline even excited the blogs. Unlike any other housewife, Marlo began to get tons of publicity before she even started to film the show. The season premiered October 2011, and nothing went the way the producers planned. Nene denied all allegations of cheating, and Marlo and Nene became really good friends. But Marlo was still a good fit for the show. If anybody threw any shade at her, she threw it right back. The bigger storyline for Marlo is what was going on behind the scenes. Turns out the big engagement that Marlo told the producers about between her and Charles, well, it simply wasn't true. Charles had absolutely no idea that the producers thought they were engaged. And her previous face stabbing incident came back with full force. It was on every media outlet. And to make matters even worse, the victim had ended her own life 6 years after the situation took place. Things got so bad that the victim's family had to come out and say they did not blame Marlo for the victim taking her own life. Then rumors start to swirl. People begin to say because she wasn't engaged to Charles and the whole entire face slashing situation, this was the reason Bravo never offered Marlo a peach as a full-time housewife. Nevertheless, Marlo plunged forward. She created a foundation called Glam It Up. It was a mentor program for foster girls between the ages of 13 and 17. Marlo never forgot what it felt like to be a foster child, and this was her way of giving back. And this wasn't a foundation in Marlo's name only. She actually got in and did a majority of the work. Marlo continued to appear on The Housewives as a friend to the show, but on season 6, she had a huge falling out with good buddy Nene Leakes. Nene felt that Marlo was taking advantage of her by being friends with Kenya Moore. And Marlo felt, as a grown woman, she wasn't going to allow anyone to choose her friends for her. According to Kandi Burruss, it was during this time that the network stopped bringing her on the show so much. In other words, without a friendship with Nene, her camera time was cut significantly. Kandi would go on to say it was during this time that Marlo approached Kandi and Todd. She said, "I want to do reality TV again." So Kandi and Todd developed another TV show. It was called Hot Atlanta, and it starred Marlo and featured celebrity YouTuber Funky Dineva. They had got the project green-lighted by WeTV and was set to film. But at the last minute, according to Kandi, WeTV pulled out of the project. Kandi explained it by saying the network lost interest. However, Funky Dineva, he was a bit more forthcoming by saying, Marlo effed up our show we had on WeTV, so now she gotta be over there with the housewives. Marlo had too many demands for a new show, and there just wasn't enough budget for it. So she returned to being a friend to the show on The Housewives of Atlanta. During the 2 years that it took for Kandi and Todd to find a network for the new show, Marlo had reconciled with Nene. She even appeared as a bridesmaid in Nene's show, I Dream of Nene. Then, on March 2nd, 2018, the unthinkable happened. Marlo's little brother died from a brain injury. Marlo was devastated. She said they shared a bond that cannot be explained. Marlo was immediately comforted. All of her friends rallied around her during this time for support, like Kandi Burruss, Shamari DeVoe, Cynthia Bailey, Tiny Harris, Tamar Braxton, Nene, and Greg Leakes. The following year, Marlo had to be a support system to her sister. Her sister was admitted into a psychiatric ward for schizophrenia. She had been battling with the illness for a while. So Marlo stepped in to help out by taking her children in. She admitted in interviews that her nephews actually call her Muntie, a nickname short for Mommy Auntie. Not only did Marlo take on the huge task of raising her nephews, her role even changed on the show. Instead of being the troublemaker, she turned somewhat into a peacekeeper this season. And she's definitely a good shoulder for her buddy Nene Leakes to lean on, as Nene's relationship with other cast members became fractured. In fact, she was even by Nene's side as Greg dealt with his cancer treatment. After everything that has happened to Marlo, she insists that she's okay with not being a full-time housewife. She says, I do feel I deserve one because I think it's only fair to the fans. But I know what I do and I know what I bring to the show. And some of her other castmates have came straight out and said Marlo deserves a peach. People like Nene Leakes, Kandi Burruss, and Portia Williams. Even talk show host Wendy Williams has said Marlo deserves a peach. And head honcho Andy Cohen's response when asked if Marlo would ever hold a peach, he said, never say never. Okay guys, so let me know in the comments section, what did you think of Marlo Hampton's life? And do you think Marlo deserves a peach, or is she the best friend of the show there ever will be? After all, she's still getting paid good money. And don't forget to leave in the comments section, whose life would you want to know about next? If you like this video, don't forget to click that like button. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do that. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.